This month, May 2026, health workers in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo started dying. 4 deaths in 4 days. Whilst the virus was real and the threat was escalating, tests kept coming back negative. Today, we find out why, what that means for Africa, and what the continent's research networks are doing about it.
The WHO has declared a public health emergency of international concern. So as of today, there have been over 1,000 suspected cases, and there's a bit of a disconnect between...
Welcome to another episode of the ACRN Health Podcast. My name is Wilfred Gurupira, and I'm joined by someone who needs no introduction, Dr. Tariro Makadzange, the CEO of ACRN. Although today, we have her in her capacity as a practicing infectious disease physician and a vaccine immunologist. Welcome, Dr. Tariro.
Thank you, Wilfred.
So, getting straight into it, Dr. Tariro, there is an active Ebola outbreak there right now, and the assumption most people have is they know and understand what Ebola means, and myself included. I mean, we've had outbreaks before, but it seems like this outbreak is different in a very specific way. So, can you just start by explaining what exactly is happening and what are we dealing with?
Yeah, thanks, Wilfred. And I think it's a good question to start off with. When most people hear about Ebola, we think about the 2014 to 2016 West Africa epidemic, or
Yes.
a little bit more recent, DRC outbreak in 2018 to 2020, and there was more recently one in Uganda as well. But the West Africa and the DRC outbreaks, those are caused by the Zaire Ebola virus. There are many different members of the Ebola virus family, about six of them, 4 of them that are known to cause significant human disease. And so the Ebola Zaire is the one that we know quite a lot about. And the one that we've built therapeutics and vaccines against. But this one that is currently circulating right now in the DRC and Uganda is a different species entirely. It's the Bundibugyo virus. I'm going to call it Bundi for short, if that's okay.
Yes.
The Bundi Ebola virus. And that distinction is a real distinction, and we'll talk a bit about it more, but it is a different virus than the Zaire virus that we have since built some monoclonal antibodies, licensed vaccines, but at the moment, none of those therapeutic options exist for the Bundi virus.
Okay. But surely, Dr. Tariro, this is not, it could be a different strain, the Bundi virus, but we have it covered, surely?
We have it covered, not quite. And this is why, science is so important. Not quite. We're really at the beginning in terms of countermeasures. There's no licensed vaccine. There's no approved therapeutic beyond supportive care, which is very important. And we learned a lot about supportive care in the West Africa epidemic. But this is a species that before around 2006, there were only 2 recognized outbreaks of this particular strain, one in Uganda in 2007 and one in the DRC in 2012. So it's relatively rare, it's relatively understudied, and we've kind of been caught without the necessary tools that we need for countermeasures.
That's quite something when you say it like that. So give us a sense of the scale. Where are we as of today?
So as of today, there have been over 1,000 suspected cases, and there's a bit of a disconnect between suspected and confirmed cases, but over 1,000 suspected cases, and 121 confirmed cases. Uganda has 7 confirmed cases, all of those linked to importation from the DRC. The WHO has declared a public health emergency of international concern, and we're really here looking at some confirmed spread, particularly in the Turi region, the North Kivu, South Kivu regions of DRC, and then a linked case as far as Kampala, and then one patient that was transferred to Germany. So it is quite a significant event, particularly with the large number of suspected cases. The confirmed cases are lagging behind for a number of reasons, but the suspected cases should really make us all pay significant attention, as the WHO has done.
Okay. From your description, it sounds like we don't have any deaths recorded. From your statistics, what is the current death toll, if any?
So there have been deaths recorded. So this is data from a couple of days ago. About 17 confirmed deaths and over 200, close to 250 suspected deaths. The gap between suspected and confirmed, similar to the diagnostic testing piece, is something that we should talk about, particularly relating to the importance of diagnostics in this outbreak and in any outbreak.
Yeah. I was actually going to. It's funny you say that. I was going to kind of quiz you about that. This gap that you keep referring to, it's an alarming detail, and it's something I spoke about when I started this podcast. That gap and detection, or rather, how this outbreak wasn't detected initially. Can you just walk us what happened with these gaps and how do they happen?
Yeah, so when you start to look at the reporting timelines, there's a sense that the actual outbreak started in late August, so probably around the 24th April, probably
April.
around the 24th of April is when we think we know the earliest known case. But the world authorities, WHO, was alerted around the 5th of May when 4 healthcare workers died in Mongbalu in Ituri province. And that's something really important to note, right? Our healthcare workers are really at the front lines.
Yes.
Many of us and many people listening to this podcast are healthcare workers. We do this because we love our work, we love our patients, we love what we do. Healthcare workers doing what they do best, taking care of patients, may not have realized what they were dealing with. So it was when these healthcare workers died that there was concern that something was going on, some high mortality illness. It wasn't necessarily clear that it was Ebola at that time, in large part because the assay that was used to test for this, in this case, the Gene Expert Ebola assay, is good at detecting Ebola Zaire, but kept coming back negative for this particular strain. So they didn't think they were dealing with Ebola. Sorry.
Right. No, I just want to. That's it's a point I want you to kind of elaborate on. How does a test come back negative? How is that possible?
Yeah, it's a great question. So tests are designed for specific purposes, right? So a Gene Expert test is a PCR-based test. And as a PCR-based test, it's designed to pick up a specific pathogen. So scientists have studied the sequence, found the areas of the pathogen that are best suited for a diagnostic test, and have created the tools, things like primers that are specific to that pathogen. And so this test and assay is very good at doing what it's supposed to do, detect Ebola Zaire. But as we mentioned right at the beginning, the strains are quite different from each other. There's something like 40% sequence divergence between the Bundibugyo virus or the Bundi Ebola virus, as I'll call it, and the Zaire Ebola virus. And this sequence diversity is what drives some of the challenges around vaccines, monoclonal therapeutics, and diagnostic probes that have limited the diagnostic detection of this particular strain. So it was only when broader filovirus, so Ebola belongs to a broader family known as the filovirus family. It was only when those broader PCR assays were done at the INRB laboratories in DRC that it was then confirmed as the Bundibugyo virus in mid-May.
Okay. So if we look at the timelines that you've just spoken about, April is when we suspect the first cases, but clear identification, like you've said, on the 15th of May, that's a month between the first case and confirmation. If we look at it in terms of timelines, if we work by the information that you've just said, you suspected case in April, but confirmation in May. That's nearly a month between that case and confirmation.
That's correct. That's correct. So this gap is really important to note because it likely allowed some wider community healthcare associated transmission before anybody knew what we were dealing with. So this is a systems failure with genomic roots to it. So we've built our diagnostic infrastructure around one specific Ebola virus species, and this outbreak has exposed the risks of that kind of assumption.
So, kind of taking it broader, what does this mean for the ACRN, and what does it mean for the labs that are within the ACRN network?
It's a great question. I think less specifically for ACRN and the labs within the ACRN network, but maybe I'll take it out a little bit more and more think about it for Africa in general, right? So, the ability to build our own diagnostic tests is currently relatively limited on the continent, regardless of this particular outbreak. So that is a problem that I think we as a continent need to deal with and to address. For example, if you are a young student at the University of Zimbabwe and you want to explore studying a new virus, let's say not at all related to Ebola virus, and you download the sequence from a public registry, just as the team in the Congo and Uganda have done, they immediately publish the sequence data into a public registry. So let's say you wanted to study a virus, pull the sequence from a public registry, and you want to design primers so you can study that virus or even detect or test that virus. It's actually quite difficult for you to do that. There are very few labs, opportunities for you to purchase primers locally. You might need to purchase primers from Europe, from Asia. There is a group in South Africa where you can purchase primers, but it also takes you a long time, etc. So you're at a significant disadvantage to scientists elsewhere in the world. So aside from the Ebola question, I think there's a very real question on our capabilities on the continent to be able to do science. We're quite hamstrung in that regard. And then more specifically to the Ebola concern and issue, it made sense to focus on the Zaire strain that was the cause of some of our major outbreaks. But it's also important to realize that, viruses exist with us as humans. They are environmental, ecological, social things that happen that can really surface epidemics, and being prepared. And so it's great that they had this panfilovirus assay that enabled them to detect Ebola. And maybe now the challenge for us is to develop a gene expert, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be gene expert, assay that can be taken to the grassroots in regions that are most affected, for them to be able to much more rapidly and cost efficiently include that as part of their diagnostic testing panel.
Okay. Very interesting points that you raised there. So I want you to talk a little bit about some of the information that has come out with this new strain. I'm sure there's a fascinating story there.
Yeah, so the labs in the Congo, so the INRB and the Central Public Health Labs in Uganda, really moved fast and should be applauded, moved fast to generate and then publicly share those genomes via a number of public genome sequencing databases. And that's a plus, right? The more that we share data globally, the more likely it is that, somebody in Lagos or somebody somewhere else can rapidly develop the diagnostic tests and start to think about the science of this pathogen. And so these showed that this was the Bundibugyo strain, and that these 2026 virus clusters cluster tightly together and are distinct from the 2007 and the 2012 outbreaks. So this suggests that it probably is a new spillover from an animal reservoir, most likely, rather than a continuation, a low-level continuation of a previous strain. We don't know what the host is, but the sequencing data can start to really help folks start to think about the epidemiology and the transmission dynamics as well.
So Dr. Tariro, if I'm getting you right, and I'm going to go very slowly here because of the weight of what you're just saying. Are you saying that with this Ebola virus, this is a new introduction from an unknown source?
That's most likely. That's correct. So it's possible that the virus kind of came in somewhere between late March and late April and has been circulating undetectable before it really announced itself through this cluster of healthcare workers.
Okay. Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around that, but maybe let's move to something a bit more upbeat. Okay, so treatment. Ebola. We've had outbreaks before. There's been treatments. Surely there's a treatment for this.
So treatments, Wilfred, are really driven by science, right? And that's really part of the premise of what we're constantly talking about as ACRN. So as ACRN, we're talking about clinical research, clinical trials, etc. But that is only a small part of the full ecosystem of life sciences and life sciences development. A really critical part is being able to generate therapeutics. So the upstream parts, the science, the discovery science, and then the pharmaceutical component of developing therapeutics. So because of the outbreaks caused by Ebola Zaire, there have been treatments developed for Ebola Zaire, and we've made some pretty remarkable progress. And there was some really pivotal clinical trials that really highlighted the efficacy of the therapeutic agents. So there have been two monoclonal antibodies, one marketed as Ibanga and the other known as Inmazib from Regeneron as well. And those showed that they work, they save lives. There was the PALM trial, which showed the impact of these monoclonal antibodies in reducing mortality. So we do know for Zaire that there are therapeutics available. And then similarly, vaccines were developed, but we can talk to that a little bit later. But yes, therapeutics exist for Zaire, but therapeutics do not currently exist, or no known therapeutics currently exist for the Bundibugyo strain.
Yeah, Dr. Tara, you have to give me some wins here. Unknown source, no therapeutics. I need some sort of win here, and it kind of feels a bit like going back in time where we didn't have anything for treatment. Give me a win, please.
Yes, Wilfred. So one of the key things, so earlier we talked about the sequence divergence, right? And these antibodies target certain proteins like glycoproteins on the virus particle. And so these were specifically targeting the Zaire glycoprotein, but the sequence genomic diversity is pretty broad, so you can't really assume that there's cross-neutralization and that the Zaire-specific products will work. It's obviously important to test that and to see where the science takes you. But right now, the mainstay for patients with the Bundibugyo virus outbreak is supportive care. So that really means, managing the physiological impacts of this viral infection. And that becomes very difficult in relatively low-resourced places, low-resourced settings. But thinking about fluid resuscitation, electrolyte management, hemodynamic support, treating co-infections, all of that is very important. And we learned a lot in the West Africa epidemic. And so there's a lot of lessons from there that can be very, very useful in supporting the management and care. But, again, this is happening in a setting with very challenged healthcare systems, which again really brings the point that, we as Africans, we're only going to thrive economically, socially, if we have good healthcare systems. They don't have to be fancy healthcare systems, but they have to be functional healthcare systems that can enable us to manage crises such as these.
Yes, well, yeah, very good points. Very good points. Maybe what I want to ask you, Dr. Tariro, what we currently have, the supportive care, is it enough?
So it's always important to try and develop investigational agents, and the WHO has put out countermeasures roadmap. So looking again at antibody therapeutics, are there antibody therapeutics that do have activity? There's some data in on animal models that suggest that there may be antibodies. So all of these have awful long numbered names before they get an awful uneasy to say commercial name, but there's
Right.
one called MBP 134 AF that has some activity in animal models, has done some phase 1 studies. So that is part of the roadmap. Certainly monoclonal antibodies would be great. But at the moment, we don't have yet human efficacy data. And then there's also an oral agent. So, monoclonal antibodies are great, but we've just talked about how fragile healthcare systems are on the continent.
Yes.
So imagine you're dealing with a crisis, then you're trying to get an IV in place. Even in the best of times in Harare, getting an IV, normal saline, etc., etc. Now imagine you're out in the middle of nowhere in an area where there's what we call in Zim makorokoza, there's war, there's conflict, there's artisanal miners, I think is the English term. So, an area of quite relative instability, IV therapeutics become quite a challenge. So there is an effort on orals. Oral therapeutics would be ideal. Unfortunately, small molecules have not performed as well as the monoclonals in the Zaire epidemic, but maybe a small molecule could have activity here. So there's work on a prodrug called Beldesivir, which is a prodrug of remdesivir, which has some activity against filoviruses. That has shown some data in non-human primates, and some post-exposure trials are in the works for other strains, so like the Ebola, the Sudan variant. So it's unclear how this would work with the Bundibugyo strain. So I don't know where that is at this stage. But therapeutics are desperately needed.
Yes. And vaccines? Is anything happening in that space?
Yeah, so vaccines, so again, for the Zaire vaccine, there was a recombinant VSV Ebola virus that was developed, and that was targeted specifically for the Zaire Ebola virus. And then there was an AD26, so an adenovirus, together with an MVA Ebola virus vaccine that was developed. But unfortunately, the EU marketing authorization was withdrawn by the sponsor in May of this year for commercial reasons, not safety reasons. But again, none of those are licensed for Bundibugyo. And there's no real reason to believe that they would necessarily work for this strain. So they are intense efforts underway from a variety of groups, the groups at Oxford, etc., to develop vaccines for Bundibugyo. If I may put in a plug for the continent as well here, this is another reason why, our leadership really needs to invest in science. These sorts of countermeasures should be developing in our labs, in our institutions, in our universities, with our young people driving the science. So I'm hoping that we learned some lessons from COVID. I think nature is always giving us a wake-up call. Viruses, bacteria don't care about your politics. They have care. You have 55 countries. You have disordered, financing priorities. But if we prioritize us as humans and human health, we really need to be investing in driving that science that develops the monoclonals, the small molecules, the vaccines locally. It's not there today, but can we today start to commit to this so that 10, 20 years from now, this kind of outbreak, there's
Done.
young folks in Accra or in Harare that are developing the therapeutics to solve this.
Wow. Okay. I was going to ask, I mean, if we have spoken about the drugs, the oral drugs, the pro-drugs, some of the vaccine work, someone listening may have this question: why don't we have a vaccine for the virus? I mean, it's not a new virus, and you've explained that there's that genetic variation, but surely by now we should have developed a vaccine, maybe in anticipation.
It's a great question. So, you probably remember from COVID, humans, we have a very short memory, right? We were all locked down and miserable. And then immediately after things opened up, we totally forgot that we had gone through a pandemic. We even started to have people who were vaccine skeptics after the vaccines enabled us to get back to life, etc. And so one of our challenges as humans is we have short memories. We're very quick to move on to the next thing. And you could argue with the Bundibugyo that, there had only been 2 relatively smaller outbreaks before. And so the commercial imperative to develop a therapeutic was relatively minimal. And so, perhaps that's why it was identified and then forgotten. Nobody funded extra research on this. And for too long for us as a continent, our research funding has been from external partners, whereas, if things were operating where they should be, as Africans, as AU, as that, the Central East Africa region, could have pulled resources together to support investigators in Congo, Uganda, etc., to better study the strain, study the immunology, study, what are the correlates of protection, if there are any, what do we need to be targeting for an effective vaccine. So, the challenge for these Africa-specific diseases is there is no market, right? There's no commercialization pathway. And so where you don't have a commercialization pathway, you need a public system that says this is important. We're going to support the research in this because this is important. And that's why you have in China, the government funding research, and the US, the NIH funding research, etc. There's no commercial drive for this, but there's a massive public health drive for this. So putting in those public resources is going to be important. And then you do have global entities such as CEPI, etc., that are also there to think about the viruses that other folks who may not have a commercial imperative to develop, but the need to develop is there, because you do lose lives, as we're seeing now. And even though some countries are closing borders, seeing in the US some screening, etc., wanting to put a hospital in Kenya so that any Americans get seen there, etc., etc. You can do that, but the thing with infectious diseases, it doesn't respect our borders, and so we all need to work together as humans to target known as well as unknown pathogens that are likely to cause significant morbidity and mortality.
Wonderful. I like how you're phrasing it, and it leads me very nicely into what can we do? Talking specifically about the ACRN and our mission as an ACRN. This outbreak is happening on the continent. It's happening in 2 countries where we operate. What's our role in a situation like this?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And for us as ACRN, we're still young. We're only about 1.5 years, 2 years old. So we're really building the systems. But my goal and hope is that in 2-3 years time, we really have all the systems to support and enable the clinical trials piece to support this kind of effort. And that's part of our mission, having an always on, always ready system that can be rapidly deployed to enable clinical trials. There are a few things that are already taking place and a few things that regulators can do. So one, when you look at clinical trials and studies, part of the biggest challenge is that startup period. That startup period takes too long from, an outbreak has happened, first patient, first visit for a trial. So what we really should all be doing collectively, and I think Africa has a unique opportunity to do this, is to think in peacetime, and these peacetime windows are relatively short, right? A couple of months ago, we were talking about, or less than a couple of months, we're talking about Hunter virus, Ebola virus. Yes. There's always something going on. But are we planning for that? Are we making sure our regulators are smooth, effective, efficient? Are we using technology appropriately to enable us to get from that ideation to a protocol, to a data collection system efficiently and more streamlined? Do we have contracts in place so that getting a study up and going is not months of lawyers going back and forth debating terms, but things are already kind of well set up, and we can plan the budgeting, the logistics, the operations to be able to execute and move studies through. And so what some places are doing is having protocols, defined emergency protocols in place that regulators have looked at already, that ethics committees have looked at already. And Uganda did this very nicely in the 2025 Sudan virus outbreak that enabled them to launch a ring vaccination trial within weeks of the outbreak beginning. So doing those kinds of things at peacetime, and peacetime in quotation, is really important, so that startup is very, very quick. And then another critical piece to this is the community engagement and trust building. I cannot overemphasize that. And we talk about that as one of our pillars because it's so important. Now imagine if you are in the province where this outbreak is taking place. You've taken your baby to the clinic. They're not feeling well. You didn't get a diagnosis that it was Ebola. You went back home. The baby got sicker. Your husband, your child got sicker. Everybody's not doing well. How is that going to affect your perception of the healthcare system, your perception of trusting the healthcare system? And despite all of the good intentions of the healthcare workers, you may lose communities as you try to do things like ring vaccination, etc. So I think really thinking about community engagement all the time is super important. Do we really understand the pathogens that affect all of us? As scientists, we assume everybody thinks as a molecular biologist, but the vast majority of people don't know what genomics is, don't know what a bacteria is, what a virus is, etc. So what are we doing to communicate that all the time? Similarly with trials, the social media is super strong at giving the perception, oh, you're a guinea pig, or, oh, vaccines are bad, etc. Their message is super loud. But our message is not as loud. And how can we do that intentionally all the time, putting out a message to help people understand? Because in the research that we've done, understanding is a key component. Knowledge is a key component. And it's not just an Africa thing. It's a US thing. It's a Europe thing. It's a global thing. Knowledge about diseases and pathogens. Then understanding safety, side effects. That's what most people are concerned about. How does this affect my family, my kids? Is it safe, etc.? understanding the purpose of trials. We would not have the vaccines, the therapeutics for Zaire if those trials were not done and if we didn't have systematic evidence. So building that trust is super important and really makes or breaks any, not just trial, but any subsequent intervention.
Right. And as a network, the ACRN is building towards that, amongst other things, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just want to get into some of the plugins that you're mentioning about Africa. And we now know there's it's important that we have our own data, like you said. We understand sequencing and genomics. How does our infrastructure fit into all this?
Our infrastructure is ACRN, or the infrastructure we need to build as a continent?
As a continent.
Yeah. So I think the investments that have been made over the last few decades, particularly around infectious diseases, have really helped, and that's how you have stronger public health laboratories, etc. As overseas assistance for those systems diminishes, I think we have to be very intentional as Africa, and this is where the AU, the Africa CDC, the continental bodies become super important. We have to be intentional as Africa about how we pick this up and how we continue this thread, because this is so pivotal, right? We have built up scientists who can do the diagnostic tests, support the epidemiology, etc. How do we keep that resourced at all times, at peace times, as well as at outbreaks? How do we ensure that those capabilities are sustained is super important. And that's down at the institution level. So are those institutions resourced and able to do the work that they do? But also goes up at the policy level. Are we creating policies that promote science? Are we creating policies that promote our own drug discovery, development, therapeutics discovery, clinical trials? That's the niche that we're currently focused on as ACRN. But the whole ecosystem needs to exist. None of this is going to work if we don't have the full ecosystem, from the policy side to the research side, to the drug development side, to the clinical trial sites, to the registration, the regulatory aspect. And it's great. There are many of these components starting to come together on the continent. AMA is great. The work that networks such as ourselves are doing, universities, research institutions, the public sector. None of this is going to work if we're going to expect it all to come from government. It's not going to come from government. What government needs to do, though, is create an enabling environment to support science, and then pick up the areas where there won't be a commercial value and a commercial interest.
Wow. So Dr. Tariro, I'm just reflecting on everything that we've been discussing today and some of our previous conversations, particularly about how, Africa is such a large disease burden, but not enough of the clinical trials are done in Africa. And so I have to ask you, does this current Ebola outbreak reflect that problem?
Totally.
The shortest answer yet.
Totally.
Please explain. Please explain.
Well, if I had an alternate universe, and we don't have an alternate universe, but if you look at China, and I've said this many times, 20, 30 years ago, the China FDA was no different from MCAZ, right? And Zim is a tiny country on the continent, so it's the same across the continent. But what was different? and they scholars who know this even better than I do, but as just reflecting on it, a couple of things strike me. So one is a recognition that life sciences industry is at the core of any economic development, right? Science in general is at the core, whether you're talking about physical sciences, computational engineering, etc. There's no country on the planet that develops without substantive investments in science. But life sciences is super important. It's a major source of GDP if you look at Europe and North America, and China recognized that. But it's also critical for keeping your population healthy. If you want to thrive, you need to have good life sciences, good therapeutics for society to thrive. And then secondly, making it a national priority. So just as we prioritize mining and, a whole bunch of other things, let's prioritize life sciences so that the story in 20 years, and I say 20 years because I know this is not a flip off a switch, but it's a lot of intentionality that builds towards it. So that the story in 20 years is very different from the story today. We are globally collaborative, and science by its nature is, but you really have the roots on the continent that you can address this, not only from the epidemiological side, where we're very strong, but all the way from the discovery, the drug development, the trials, the registration, that full independence and capability and leadership. I'd love to see in 20 years, more innovative drugs coming out of Africa than anywhere else. It seems crazy to say it, but I think if we're intentional, we can do it. There's no reason why we couldn't do it. So that's a long version to the question you asked, but absolutely, this is not necessary to happen in the future. And also, part of this happening is, where is it happening? It's in a conflict zone with artisanal, the whole environment creates this kind of outbreak to happen. And so that really brings much broader social political questions and issues to bear. So you obviously have to fix those things as well, but also having a strong life sciences industry is very important.
Okay. So as we come to the end of this podcast, I want to ask you, in the coming weeks, what are you most closely watching for with this particular outbreak, that our viewers and our listeners can also tag along?
I think there are a few things for us to closely watch, and hopefully these things will happen and advocate for. I think here the leadership of the Africa CDC, the AU, the local country health systems, governments, and you're seeing some of that come together quite nicely. The WHO. All of these bodies are very important bodies for supporting and controlling these kinds of outbreaks. So really be watching for that. Also be watching for innovations. What sort of therapeutics are being developed? What sort of trials are taking place? How quickly, efficiently, effectively are those trials taking place? And how are we learning the lessons from this to mitigate and prevent the next outbreak? And then I think collectively, as humans, remembering that we're all in this together, these sorts of things you can't really shut your borders to, because the world doesn't exist that way anymore. So a crisis in one part of the world is a crisis for all of us. And infectious diseases and pathogens can overcome us if we don't work collectively as humans to address the risks that face us. And improve the health and the lives of everyone everywhere. This will not stop unless we have stronger healthcare systems, stronger science, stronger inclusive research and science to tackle all the global issues.
Mm. Very, very, very important points. And thank you for giving us pointers on what to look for. So any final thoughts? Anything to for our viewers and listeners to take away?
Yeah. So I think my final thoughts are really, thoughts to the communities that are being affected by this outbreak, to the healthcare workers who are really at the front line of addressing this outbreak, and the public health officials that are leading this. There's some unsung heroes in this world, and I think our public health personnel and officials are really among those, and the frontline health workers. So really conclude sort of with thoughts to them, and then also to say, we have an ambition and a vision and a dream for Africa that may seem out of proportion to the reality on the ground. But just to say that as a continent, if we don't dream, if none of us push the envelope, then the status quo remains. But if we dream and we push the envelope, we could have a very different future. The probability of having a different future is there, versus if we do nothing, for certain, nothing will change, nothing new will emerge.
Dr. Tariro, I want to thank you for this very important topic, which is also quite sobering. But I also want to thank you for ending on a win and on a high, because when we started, I was counting all the losses and wondering, surely there should be some wins. So thank you for ending on a high, and definitely I want you back, but maybe not on the Bundy virus. I need more wins to take away with.
Yes, definitely we'll be back, and thanks for having me on this episode.
This has been another episode of the ACRN Health Podcast. I wish the topic was much lighter, but it's been very sobering. Please like us and share this information with others so that people know. And don't forget to follow us. Until the next time.